Hello, my name is Sabrina, and I used to believe family was everything. But that was before the night my dad screamed, "Pack your things, leave tonight," when I begged him for school fees. My brother smirked, calling me a failure, and my mom, she just looked away. It was in that moment I realized I'd been living a lie they'd built to keep me small. I was the one who sacrificed everything for them, and yet, when I needed them the most, they cut me out, left me to fend for myself. But I didn't go quietly. I took action, cutting every bill, taking control, and walking away from the family who made me feel invisible. But here's the real question. Can you ever truly escape the ties that bind you to the people who raised you? What happens when you finally decide to fight back? It was the same old scene in the kitchen, just like any other night. The smell of simmering stew lingered in the air, too familiar to bring any sense of comfort. The faint creak of the aging floorboards under my feet echoed in the silent house as I stirred the pot. My mother, Vera, stood beside me, peeling potatoes, her movements mechanical. The silence between us was thick, like the air that hung over us. She didn't speak unless she had to, and even then, it was always brief, like she was saving words for something more important. I watched her face, trying to see if there was any spark, any trace of warmth in her eyes, but there was nothing. Not today. I sighed inwardly, trying not to let the frustration show. The front door creaked open, and I barely noticed Zoran's arrival. He always entered with that arrogant confidence that somehow managed to fill the room even before he said a word. His heavy footsteps echoed, and the subtle shift in the air signaled his presence. I could hear my mother's voice greeting him as if he were royalty, and I wondered, not for the first time, when I stopped feeling like I belonged here. "Dinner's almost ready," I muttered, barely looking at him. He waved me off, too focused on his phone, the perfect embodiment of someone who knew they had it all. And yet, I could already feel the familiar sting of being invisible. Zoran settled at the table, a casual air about him, like he was too good for this house, too good for any of us. My dad, Corbin, came in shortly after, a loud laugh filling the room. He clapped Zoran on the back, his deep voice filling the kitchen with pride. "You're gonna do big things, kid," my dad said, taking his place at the head of the table. "I can see it. You've got that drive." I swallowed a bitter taste, my fingers tightening around the spoon I was holding. It was never for me, was it? The praise, the attention. It was always for Zoran. I smiled and kept my thoughts to myself, just like always. Dinner began, and as usual, the conversation flowed, but it was always about Zoran's successes. My father would talk about his business deals, praising Zoran for every little accomplishment. He didn't even look my way, even though I had been the one holding the family together for years. My mind wandered to all the late nights, all the things I had done to keep them afloat, but no one seemed to notice. I glanced over at my daughter, Narina. She was sitting quietly, her small frame hunched over her plate. She was only 8, but she had already learned to stay out of the way, to keep quiet when the adults talked. It broke my heart a little more each time I saw her absorb the tension in the room. My mother, Vera, didn't even try to make eye contact with me. Instead, she focused on cutting her vegetables. Her silence was suffocating, a constant reminder that I wasn't even worth speaking to. I cleared my throat, hesitating for a moment. The words felt like they weighed a ton, but I knew I had to say them. This was the moment. I wasn't sure what I expected, but the need for help was becoming too much to hide. "Dad? Mom? I need some help with Narina's school fees," I said, my voice almost a whisper, barely daring to look up. The room fell silent. The only sound was the clink of silverware against plates. Everyone froze, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stretch. This was it. I held my breath, hoping, praying, that maybe, just maybe, this time, they would listen. Corbin, my father, was the first to break the silence. He slammed his fork down onto the plate, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "Again?" he growled, his voice rising. "What have you ever done that's worth investing in? All you've ever done is play the martyr." My heart sank. I had worked so hard. I had done everything for them, but it didn't matter. It would never be enough. Vera let out a sigh, keeping her eyes on her plate. Zoran didn't even look up. He just smirked, his lips curling in that all-knowing way that made me want to scream. Failure, he muttered, barely audible, but enough for everyone to hear. Narina's small fingers tightened around mine. Her little eyes were wide, filled with confusion and fear. She had never seen her family like this before. I could feel the weight of her fear pressing down on me, but I swallowed it down, forcing a calm face. I looked up, meeting my father's gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, no compassion. He just looked at me like I was a problem he didn't want to deal with. Pack your things, leave tonight, Corbin spat, his voice laced with venom. It was as if the room had stopped breathing. The weight of his words hit me, harder than I expected. The years of silence, of doing everything for them, had come to this. I was nothing more than a burden to them. The spoon I had been holding clattered against the table, the sound sharp and final. Narina gasped, the sound breaking through the heavy silence. I felt my heart race, but I stayed frozen in place, my face burning, but my expression calm. I didn't want them to see me break. Not now. Not ever again. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, to scream, but I stayed still. I knew this was it. This was the moment I had been dreading, but also the moment I needed to move on from this family. I glanced at my daughter, who was still gripping my hand. Her small face was pale, her eyes filled with confusion. I squeezed her hand tighter, my grip steadying both of us. I thought about the years, the sacrifices, the late nights spent working, keeping everything together for them. I thought about all the times I had been ignored, all the times I had kept quiet, trying to avoid confrontation, trying to keep peace. But not anymore. Not tonight. I stood slowly, taking one last look at the family that had never once considered me a priority. I had done everything for them, and now I was walking away. Come on, Narina, I said softly, my voice calm but firm. I didn't look back as I walked toward the door. And as I walked past that dinner table, I knew I'd never return to it again. The door shut behind me with a hollow final click. Narina's small hand tightened in mine, and I could feel the tiny tremors in her fingers. I hadn't said anything, but my heart was beating too fast, too loud in my chest. Each step I took felt like it was carrying me farther away from the life I had known for so long. The life where I had sacrificed everything to make them proud. But now it was over. I could still hear the echoes of my father's command. Pack your things. Leave tonight. Those words, so cold, so final, had shaken me to my core. As the door closed behind me, it was like the house itself had swallowed me whole, leaving nothing but the empty silence that I would never be able to erase from my mind. I pulled Narina closer, my voice quiet, barely a whisper. Let's go, honey. Her eyes were wide, but she said nothing. The soft shuffle of our footsteps was the only sound as we walked toward the car. The chill of the night air hit my face, sharp and biting. The world outside felt so different from the house we had just left. There, everything had been suffocating. Every glance, every word weighed down by years of silence and resentment. But here, in the open air, it felt like I could finally breathe. I could feel the weight of the night pressing on my shoulders, but there was no turning back. I had to keep moving forward, even if I didn't yet know where that path would take me. Narina's small body was close to mine, her head barely reaching my shoulder as we walked. She was so quiet, and it broke me. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, but I couldn't make her any promises. Not yet, not when I wasn't sure I could even promise that to myself. When we reached the car, I hesitated for a second. The door seemed to be mocking me with its stillness, just like the house behind me. I opened it, pulling Narina inside. The engine hummed to life under my fingertips, the sound somehow comforting, even though everything else felt like it was falling apart. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house was behind me now, but the memories, the years of trying to please them, still lingered in the rearview, just like the house that would never be home to me again. But as I pulled away, a strange sense of relief began to settle in. My father's words were still fresh in my mind, echoing in the pit of my stomach. Failure. He had said it so simply, with that cold, bitter tone. I had worked so hard for them, for him, but it was never enough. Failure. The word bounced around in my head, getting louder with every mile that passed. I could feel the sting of it, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. I had tried so damn hard, given everything I had, and for what? For them to see me as a disappointment? To be nothing more than a burden? I had spent my entire life trying to make them proud, to be someone they could talk about with pride, but all I had earned was a seat at the table, with the words failure stamped across it. I had tried to be the good daughter, the good mother, the good person, but none of that mattered. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. I don't need their approval, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. It was a small declaration, a whisper in the wind, but it carried weight, a weight that felt heavy, but also freeing, because in that moment I realized that I didn't need to keep bending myself to fit their mold. I didn't need to beg for their love. It was time to stand on my own. My thoughts swirled, a mess of doubt, anger, and exhaustion. I thought of the years I had spent quietly suffering, trying to prove myself, trying to get them to see me as more than just the daughter who could never get it right. But now, as I drove further and further away from the house, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I didn't need them to see me at all. I glanced over at Narina, her small face still solemn. She had always been the quiet one, the one who felt things deeply but never spoke up. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "Are you okay, sweetie?" I asked. She nodded, her lips trembling, but she didn't speak. I didn't know what to say to make her feel better. Hell, I didn't know how to make myself feel better. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to keep moving forward. For her. For me. We drove for what felt like hours, the quiet stretching between us. The night outside the car window was dark, and the headlights cut through it like a beacon, guiding us towards something unknown. But it wasn't the unknown that scared me. It was the knowledge that I had been living in a house of lies for so long, and now I was free from it. Free, but terrified. I pulled into a small gas station a few miles out of town, the lights flickering overhead. I needed to stop for a moment. I parked the car and sat there for a few minutes, the engine still running, the hum filling the air. My hands rested on the steering wheel, my heart still pounding in my chest. What now? I thought. What do I do now? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as I looked out the window, watching the dark stretch ahead. I couldn't answer it yet. I didn't know what the next step was. But for the first time in years, I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me what to do. I was doing it on my own. With one last deep breath, I turned off the engine. Narina stirred in the seat next to me, and I looked over at her. Her eyes met mine, and there was a flicker of something in them. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't confusion. It was something else. Something like hope. I got out of the car and opened Narina's door. Together, we stepped out into the cold night, leaving the house, the lies, and everything else behind. I didn't know where we were going, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally heading in the right direction. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't let this defeat me. I had to rise. I couldn't let it define me, what they said, what they did. For so long, I'd bent to their will, trying to stay small, trying to fit into the life they expected of me. I thought if I just tried harder, did more, maybe then they'd see me. Maybe then they'd realize I wasn't just the failure they made me out to be. But now, in this tiny apartment, with Narina by my side, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. We were settled here. Or at least, as settled as you can be in a cramped apartment where the walls feel like they're closing in, the space too small to stretch, too small for dreams. It wasn't much, but it was ours. No more suffocating silence. No more looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next blow would come. As I stared at the worn couch, the unpacked boxes scattered around, the reality of it all sunk in. This was it. This was what I had chosen. A life without them. A life of my own. Narina sat at the small table, coloring quietly, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't say much, but I could tell she was trying to make sense of everything, just like I was. We both were. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this conflicted. Part of me still longed for the comfort of family, the familiarity of home, even if it was a home I'd spent my whole life trying to belong to. But another part of me, that part was angry. Angry at myself for letting them have so much control. Angry at them for making me feel so small for so long. I pulled my phone from my purse, the familiar screen lighting up in my hands. My finger hovered over the app, my bank account. I could still hear my father's voice in my head, the cruel words he'd said to me over dinner. Failure. His voice had been a slap, a final blow that had shattered any hope I had left of ever being good enough in his eyes. The bitterness in his tone echoed in my ears as I opened the bank's app. The screen loaded, and the balance showed the reality of everything I'd been doing for years. Utilities, mortgage, TV subscriptions. It had always been me. I'd paid their bills, sent them money when they asked, never questioning it. I thought I was just doing my part as a daughter, as a mother. But now, as I saw it all laid out, it hit me. All this time, I wasn't helping them out of love or duty. I was being controlled. They had power over me, not because they cared about me, but because they needed me. The room seemed to close in around me. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. I could feel the weight of the years pressing down on my chest, all the times I had paid without question, all the times I had bent over backward to make sure they were comfortable, to make sure they had everything they wanted. I had kept my head down, my mouth shut, and for what? To be told that I was a failure, to be dismissed like I didn't matter? I wasn't going to do it anymore. My hand shook as I opened the utilities app. I tapped the electricity bill. I hovered over the cancel button, a bead of sweat forming at the back of my neck. For a brief second, I hesitated. Was this the right thing to do? Was I really going to sever all ties with them like this? But then, I remembered my mother's face, her cold eyes, the way she had looked away when I asked for help. She never once considered me worthy of respect. Not once. With a deep breath, I pressed the button. The cancellation was final. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was something deeper. It was power. I moved on to the next bill. The water bill. Then the cable bill. Each one I canceled felt like a small victory, like I was slowly reclaiming something that had been taken from me without my consent. By the time I finished, my hands were trembling, but my chest felt lighter. I stared at the phone for a moment, the silence between me and Narina almost deafening. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. They'd never had control over me. I had given it to them. The realization hit me hard, but it also brought with it a sense of clarity. All these years, I had let them dictate my life, my actions, my worth. I had let their approval be the driving force behind everything I did, but not anymore. I placed the phone down and looked at Narina, who was still coloring, her small fingers steady with each stroke of the crayon. A simple moment, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like a turning point. I was finally free. I wasn't bound to their expectations anymore. I wasn't tied to the weight of their disapproval. I was standing on my own, and that thought alone made me feel stronger than I had in years. Narina looked up at me, sensing the change, her eyes soft and uncertain, but hopeful. I smiled at her, the weight of the world momentarily lifted off my shoulders. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, though I didn't quite know if that was true, but I had to believe it. I had to make myself believe it for her. I stood up, moving toward the small window of our apartment, peering out into the darkening street. The world outside felt so different now, so much bigger, and yet, for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt like I had a future, one that was mine to shape. And whatever came next, I would face it head on. I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo the past. But I could move forward. I could take control of my life, no matter what it took. The phone buzzed on the table, a notification flashing on the screen, another reminder of the world I had left behind, but I wasn't looking back anymore. I had made my choice. I walked back to the couch and sat down beside Narina, who had returned to her coloring. She looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something I hadn't seen in her eyes for years. Hope. The silence that greeted me in the morning felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating me. The apartment, though small and cluttered, should have felt like a refuge. But instead, it only reminded me of how far I had fallen. Narina was still asleep in her room, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I could hear the distant hum of cars outside, a stark contrast to the stillness inside. I stood in front of the kitchen counter, my eyes landing on the unpaid rent notice. The numbers blurred for a moment, a reminder of what I was up against. I had no choice but to keep moving forward, even if the weight of financial insecurity pressed harder against me with every passing day. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the courage to face the reality of it all. This apartment, this space that I was now supposed to call home, was a far cry from the house I had grown up in, the one that I thought would always be there, providing comfort and support. But now, that house felt like a distant dream, something I could never go back to, no matter how much I longed for it. The phone on the counter vibrated, jolting me out of my thoughts, a string of missed calls and texts. My heart sank when I saw the names: Vera, Corbin, Zoran. Their messages flashed across the screen. "Call us, Sabrina. This isn't you. We're sorry. We need to talk." I couldn't bring myself to answer. I knew that if I did, it would all start again. The manipulation, the lies, the feeling of being less than. I had spent so many years trying to earn their approval, trying to be what they wanted me to be, and for what? To be dismissed? To be ignored? I stared at the screen for a moment longer, a part of me fighting the urge to respond. I wanted to pick up the phone, hear their voices, make them explain, make them apologize, but I knew that if I answered, I would be giving them the power once more. So, I ignored the calls. I deleted the messages. It felt strange, liberating, almost. I'd never done this before. Every time they'd called in the past, I'd been there, ready to help, to fix things. But now, for the first time, I wasn't answering. And it felt right, like I was finally taking back control. I leaned against the counter, the weight of the moment settling in. I wasn't just ignoring them, I was walking away, finally cutting the strings that had bound me to them for so long. But the emptiness lingered. The silence in the apartment felt louder now, like a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. I couldn't help but think back to when I was a little girl, always second to Zoran, always in the shadow of my brother, never good enough, never seen. I remembered the family gatherings, where I would work tirelessly to make everything perfect, but when it came time for recognition, I was overlooked. I could still see my mother's face, her cold indifference. She never once saw me for who I was, only for what I could do for her. The memory hit me hard, like a punch to the stomach. That was the moment I had been fighting against my whole life. I had been fighting for their approval, for their love. But it was never about love. It was about control. I had been a tool for them to use, and when they no longer had any use for me, they cast me aside. I stood up straight, a fire igniting in me. I was done. No more trying to be what they wanted. No more asking for their help, their approval. I turned to look at Narina, who had finally woken up and was sitting quietly on the couch, her crayons scattered in front of her. She looked at me with those big, innocent eyes, and I felt a surge of protectiveness wash over me. I had been fighting for her all along, but now, I realized, I was fighting for myself too. I walked to the door, taking one last look around the apartment. It wasn't much, but it was ours. It was a start, a fresh beginning. I had spent so many years letting my family dictate my life, my choices, but no more. I was done letting them hold power over me. The only power I needed now was my own. I walked to my phone, picked it up, and stared at it for a long moment. Then, with a sense of finality, I dialed the number I promised myself I would never call again. The phone rang. Each ring felt like a lifetime. I had no idea what I was going to say when they picked up. But I knew I had to say something. I couldn't let this go on any longer. The phone clicked, and I heard her voice. "Vera." "Sabrina, please," she said, her voice shaky. "We need to talk." For a second, I almost caved. But then I remembered what had brought me to this moment. The years of silence, The years of bending to their will, of sacrificing my own happiness for theirs. "I'm done, Mom," I said, the words coming out stronger than I thought they would. "I can't keep doing this. I'm not your pawn anymore. I'm done." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her processing my words, and for the first time, I felt no need to explain myself. She didn't deserve an explanation. "I'll be fine," I said, my voice steady. "You'll have to figure it out without me." I hung up the phone, and for the first time, I felt free. I stared at the phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over the screen as I processed the last few days. The silence, the fear, the weight of all that had happened since I left. It felt like a 1,000-pound weight on my chest, but it also felt oddly freeing. I had taken control. I was done playing the role of the obedient daughter, the one who always had to fix everything, but the next step, the final confrontation, was coming. Narina was in the corner, quietly drawing as she always did. She was so calm, so innocent, and yet everything I was doing was for her. Everything was for her safety, her future, her ability to grow up without the burden of the manipulations I had carried for far too long. I had to be strong for her. I had to break free, for both of us. My phone buzzed again, and I looked down. It was Zoran. I felt the anger rise in me almost immediately. Zoran, my brother, the one who had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But I was done being in his shadow. I was done being overshadowed by his success, his charm, his manipulations. With a deep breath, I pressed accept. His smug voice came through the speaker. "Sabrina, I know things are a little crazy right now, but we need to talk. Just hear me out." I wasn't going to let him sweet-talk me. "No, Zoran," I said, my voice steady. "You have no idea what you've done." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, probably trying to compose himself. "Look, I get it. You're upset," he said with a forced chuckle. "But this isn't like you. I know Mom and Dad pushed you, but we're family. This isn't the way to handle things." I could hear the insecurity in his voice, the way he tried to mask it with his usual arrogance. It made me sick. "No," I said again, my voice unwavering. "This is exactly the way I need to handle things. You're the one who has no idea what you've done. All these years you've used Mom and Dad, and I've been right there, cleaning up the mess you've left behind. And what do I get in return? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." His silence was telling. He couldn't argue with that. It was true. He had always been the favored one, the one who was celebrated, while I was left to do the dirty work. I didn't give him a chance to respond. I hung up the phone. That was the last time I was going to let him manipulate me with his sweet talk. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Corbin, my father. The man who had never once acknowledged all the sacrifices I had made. The man who had always seen me as nothing more than a tool, something to be used when it was convenient, discarded when it wasn't. I stared at the phone, hesitation creeping in. I had to answer. I had to face him, once and for all. With a sigh, I pressed accept, and his cold voice immediately hit my ears. "This has gone too far, Sabrina," Corbin said, his tone ice cold. "You don't belong out there. Come back and let's fix this. You're making a huge mistake." I could feel my heart racing in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't. I had been manipulated by him for too long. "No," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "I've been fixing things for you my whole life. Now it's your turn to fix your own mistakes." He was silent for a moment, clearly taken aback by my response. I wasn't the little girl he could control anymore. I was an adult. I was stronger than that now. "Do you know what you've done?" I continued. "All these years, I've been supporting you, paying bills, keeping everything afloat. And for what? For nothing. For your constant expectations. For your belief that I'm just supposed to take care of things. But I'm done." Corbin's voice dropped, low and menacing. "You don't want to do this, Sabrina. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I shot back. "And if you want my help, you'll have to earn it." But I won't come back unless I see real change. I won't come back unless you change. I hung up before he could say anything else. The finality of it settled in me like a rock sinking into the deepest part of the ocean. I was done, and there was no going back. I stood there for a moment, looking at the phone in my hand. The silence in the apartment was deafening. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't the silence of submission. It was the silence of freedom. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I wasn't waiting for their permission. Narina was still sitting in the corner, drawing peacefully. She looked up at me as if she could sense the shift, as if she knew that this was the turning point for both of us. I smiled at her, the first real smile I had in a long time. "We're going to be all right, sweetheart," I whispered, even though part of me still felt the sting of everything I had lost. But in that moment, I realized something. I had lost nothing. I had gained everything. This was the beginning of something new. A new life, free from the weight of their expectations, free from the manipulation, free from the suffocating silence that had held me back for so long. But little did I know, they wouldn't just let me go that easily. The phone's persistent buzzing echoed in the quiet apartment, filling the space that had once been so chaotic, so full of tension, but now seemed to be too still, too peaceful. Narina was sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring. The sound of her crayon on the paper was the only noise in the room. I watched her, my heart heavy with the weight of the decisions I had made. I'd never imagined it would come to this. But now that it had, I felt strangely liberated. I had no place to go back to. The family I had fought so hard to hold together had turned on me, and yet here I was, standing on my own for the first time in my life. The phone rang again, and my fingers hesitated over the screen. It was Zoran, my brother. I stared at the name, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear what he had to say, but I already knew. He wasn't calling to make things right. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to fix things on his terms, to try and manipulate me into coming back. I wasn't going to let him do that again. I let the phone ring. A few seconds passed, and then the vibration stopped. But before I could relax, another text came in. This time, it was from my mother. "We didn't raise you to be like this. Your actions are causing irreparable damage to the family. You're better than this, Sabrina. Come home." The words stung more than I expected. I wasn't just letting go of my family, I was letting go of a lifetime of lies. All these years of doing what they wanted, sacrificing my own happiness, and for what? To be manipulated, used, tossed aside the moment I stopped playing the part they expected of me. I stared at the message for a moment longer, my chest tightening. There was no going back now. But something inside me shifted. The anger, the resentment, it was all boiling up now. They had no right to guilt-trip me, to tell me I was destroying the family when they were the ones who had been using me. As I put the phone down, the weight of my own anger began to crystallize. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about me breaking free from their control. This was about me standing up for what was right, about finally being seen for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. The phone buzzed again, louder this time. I picked it up, expecting it to be more of the same. But when I saw the name on the screen, I felt a sickening realization crawl over me. It was my father, Corbin, the man who had spent my entire life treating me like an afterthought. The man who had never seen me as anything more than a pawn in his game. I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but I knew better. If I was going to be free, I had to face him. I had to face all of them. I swiped the phone open and answered. "Sabrina?" His voice came through, cold and detached. "We need to talk." I stood up, walking slowly around the small apartment, trying to steady my nerves. "What's there to talk about?" I asked, my voice steady, but my heart was pounding in my chest. "You know this has gone too far," Corbin continued, his tone laced with frustration. "You don't belong out there. You're making a mistake. You need to come back and let's fix this." The words felt like a slap in the face. He was trying to manipulate me again, trying to convince me to come back under his control. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't going to play along. "I've been fixing things for you my whole life," I said, the words coming out faster than I intended. "Now it's your turn. I've done enough. I'm done." There was a moment of silence, but I could feel the tension building between us, like a storm about to break. Corbin's voice hardened. "This isn't over, Sabrina. You've crossed a line. You don't just walk away from your family like this." "Why didn't you care about me before?" I asked, my voice shaking with fury. "Why didn't you ever appreciate everything I did for you? I gave up my life for you, for Mom, for everything you wanted. And for what? So you could use me and throw me away the moment I stopped being useful? I'm done." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. He didn't know how to respond to that, but I wasn't finished yet. "I've been supporting you all these years, and you never once acknowledged it. You never once said thank you. I'm not your servant, Corbin. I'm not your punching bag anymore. You want my help? You're going to have to earn it. And I'm not coming back until I see a real change." There was silence on the line. I could almost hear his mind racing, trying to process what I had just said, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. When I hung up, for the first time in my life, I hung up on my father. I looked at Narina, who was still sitting on the floor, drawing, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. I smiled at her, the weight in my chest easing just a little. This was it. This was the moment. I had finally taken control of my life. But as I sat there, the phone buzzed once more. This time, it was Zoran. I didn't even want to look at it. I was done. I didn't need to hear his voice anymore. I didn't need his apologies or his empty words. But before I could put the phone down, a text came through. A public post. It was from Zoran. "Failed at life, and now she's gone too far," it read. I felt the anger rise within me. He was doing it again. They were using their power, their control, to try and humiliate me, to try and break me, but I wasn't going to let them. Not this time. I looked at the phone, my hands shaking with rage. The family was playing their dirty game of control. But I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. I was making my own rules now. I grabbed my laptop and opened it up. I had a plan, a way to take back my power once and for all. I opened my email and began typing, not in anger, but in dignity. I wasn't going to let them get away with it anymore. I was going to reveal the truth. Everything I had done for them, every bill I had paid, every sacrifice I had made. I attached the receipts, the bills, the financial records, everything. It was time they knew the truth. I hit send, and for the first time, I felt a sense of relief. But I knew this was just the beginning. The storm was only starting. Sitting in the dimly lit apartment, Narina curled up on the couch, sound asleep. I felt a strange sense of emptiness in the silence that filled the room. The small, cozy space that had become my refuge after everything had changed now felt suffocating in its stillness. It was almost like I could hear the weight of the decisions I had made hanging in the air. My phone buzzed again, breaking the quiet. I reached for it without thinking, my pulse quickening as I saw the name on the screen. It was Corbin. I swiped to answer, bracing myself. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with the cold detachment I felt. "Sabrina," his voice came through, that familiar mixture of coldness and authority. "You've made your point, but now you'll face the consequences." My stomach tightened at his words. There it was. The reality I had been avoiding. The reality of what I had done. This wasn't just a battle about me finding myself, about breaking free. This was war. The consequences were already unfolding. And I had to face them head on, but I wasn't backing down now. I could feel my heartbeat quicken as the anger inside me began to build, the intensity of it pushing everything else aside. "You've never cared about me," I replied, my voice low but firm. "This isn't about me making a mistake. This is about me finally choosing to stop fixing everything for you and making my own life." There was a long pause, a heavy silence that seemed to stretch for miles. I could feel him on the other end of the line, calculating his next move. "You need to come home, Sabrina," he said, his tone dripping with control. "We'll sort this out," face to face. You're making a mistake. I've made my decision, I shot back, the words slipping out with a fierceness I hadn't known I had. It's your turn to change, not mine. Without giving him a chance to respond, I ended the call. The buzzing of the phone continued in the background, but I didn't care anymore. The silence that followed felt almost comforting, though I knew it wouldn't last. But before I could settle into the quiet, another text message appeared on my screen. This time, it was from Zoran. You've gone too far now. You'll regret this, it read, followed by a link to a social media post. I opened it, my eyes scanning the words. It was a public post from Zoran, mocking me. Failed at life, and now she's gone too far. The message was blunt, cruel, and meant to humiliate me in front of everyone. I felt a rush of heat in my chest, the blood pounding in my ears. Anger surged, and I could feel the pressure building inside of me. But this time, it wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something more powerful. It was clarity. It was the realization that I had nothing left to lose. They had already taken everything from me, and now they were trying to strip away my dignity. I couldn't let them do that. I wasn't going to let them win. I glanced over at Narina, still asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. She was the reason I'd fought so hard to break free from them, the reason I'd endured years of manipulation and abuse. The thought of her made me more determined than ever to take back control. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for her, too. I felt my phone buzz again. This time, it was from my mother, Vera. The message was brief, but the weight of it hit me like a punch to the stomach. You don't know what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart, Sabrina. Come home. I squeezed my eyes shut, pushing back the wave of anger threatening to overwhelm me. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't let them manipulate me into submission again. I opened my email and stared at the draft I had written earlier. The truth had been slowly bubbling to the surface for days, and now it was time to let it spill. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative. I wasn't going to be the villain in their story anymore. It was time to set the record straight. I began typing, my fingers moving quickly across the keys. I know what you've all done, I wrote. I've spent years paying your bills, taking care of things while you ignored me, neglected me, used me. I've supported you, kept you comfortable, but you never once acknowledged it. Now I'm done. I attached the receipts, the bills, the financial transactions. Everything I had done for them, everything they had taken for granted, was right there in front of them. I hit send, and the email was out there, public, undeniable. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But that relief was quickly replaced by a knot of tension in my stomach. The storm had only just begun. My phone rang again, and I knew who it was before I even looked. It was Corbin again. I almost didn't pick it up. I didn't want to hear his voice, his manipulations, his empty promises. But I did. I couldn't stop myself. Sabrina, he said, his voice cold and flat. What have you done? I've done what I should have done a long time ago, I replied, my voice steady, but laced with the anger I'd been holding inside for years. I've taken control of my own life. You won't use me anymore. He scoffed on the other end of the line. This is going too far. You've made a mistake you'll regret. You're ruining this family. I paused, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. The kind of power that comes from telling the truth, from standing up for yourself. I'm not ruining anything, I said, my voice stronger than ever. I'm saving myself. You're the one who's ruined everything. Before he could say anything else, I ended the call again, pressing the phone to my chest. It felt like a weight had been lifted off of me. I knew they wouldn't let me go that easily. They would fight back. They would retaliate. But for the first time in my life, I was ready. And as I sat there, staring at the phone in my hands, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The battle wasn't over yet, but I had finally taken control. I had made my move. I stared at the phone in my hand as the ringing echoed in the small apartment. Narina was still asleep on the couch, the soft rhythm of her breathing filling the silence. The holidays were supposed to be different, or at least that's what I tried to convince myself. The air was thick with the tension that had built in the days since the fallout. Christmas was approaching, but I couldn't bring myself to care about the festivities or the usual celebration. This year, it wasn't about gifts or gathering around a table. It was about decisions I'd made and the next steps to take. The phone rang again, pulling me from my thoughts. I saw Corbin's name flash across the screen. My stomach dropped, and I hesitated for a moment. His calls had become a daily, almost sickening routine, each one another attempt to manipulate and regain control. But today felt different. Today, I had a decision to make. I swiped to answer, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Sabrina," Corbin's voice came through, colder than I had ever heard it. "We need to meet. We need to fix this. You've made your point, but this has gone too far." I didn't hesitate. I wasn't running anymore. "I've made my decision, Corbin. You're not getting me back into that life. I'm not coming home." There was a long, heavy silence. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head as he tried to regain control. "You're making a mistake. You don't know what you're doing." I took a deep breath, refusing to back down. "No, you don't know what you've done. But I'm done fixing your mistakes. I'm done fixing everything for you." "I'm your father," he snapped. "You don't get to make these decisions alone. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than this whole thing you've created." For a moment, I thought about hanging up, about cutting off the conversation completely. But something inside me pushed back. "I've been fixing this family for years. I'm done doing it. And I'm not coming back unless you change." The line was quiet for a beat, and then I heard him speak again, his voice low and filled with frustration. "You're tearing this family apart, Sabrina. You've gone too far this time." I almost laughed, but the sound died in my throat. "You tore it apart years ago," I said softly. "You just didn't care enough to see it." With that, I hung up the phone, a weight lifting from my chest as I did. But the relief was short-lived. The repercussions of my decision were just beginning. The phone buzzed in my hand again, and I saw another message pop up. This time, it was from Zoran. His words stung like a slap in the face. "You're making a huge mistake, Sabrina," the text read. "You failed us. You failed this family." The anger that had simmered just below the surface began to bubble up again. How dare he? How dare they make me the villain in this story when I had been the one supporting them all along? The texts kept coming, each one more cutting than the last. "You're ruining everything," my mother's message read. "I don't know who you are anymore." I set the phone down with trembling hands. The shame they were trying to heap on me didn't feel like shame anymore. It felt like fuel. They had never seen me like this, and they would never expect what came next. I walked over to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. The weight of it all pressed down on me, but it wasn't a burden anymore. It was clarity. I had made my choice. They had crossed a line, and now I was standing my ground. The truth had already been set in motion. My email to my family was sent. The receipts, the bills, the documentation, everything I had done for them, all laid bare. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was forcing them to see the truth. But as the weight of their reactions began to hit me, a voice in my head reminded me of something that had always been true. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Narina. She was the reason I had fought so hard to change my life. She was the reason I had spent years silently supporting them while they neglected me. She was the one who had never asked for any of this chaos. And she was the one who deserved more. I turned from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I had made it this far. There was no turning back. I checked my phone again. Another message from Corbin. "You've crossed the line. This isn't over." I didn't respond. The next few days passed in a blur of angry messages, social media posts from my family, and whispers from neighbors. They tried to turn the entire town against me. I could hear the rumors swirling as I passed by people at the grocery store. Some didn't even try to hide their whispers. Others gave me pitying looks. It was as though my entire world had been turned upside down, but I stood firm. I was no longer the quiet, obedient daughter. I was no longer the one who always cleaned up their mess. I was done. But even as I stood firm, the weight of my decisions kept pressing on me. They hadn't just humiliated me publicly. They had hurt me in ways that ran deeper than I had ever expected. And yet, as the days dragged on, I began to realize that my anger was only making me stronger. I had nothing left to lose. The next call came on a cold December evening. It was from my father again. I was prepared for this. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them control me anymore. As I stared at the phone, the finality of my decision hit me. There was no turning back now. There was only forward. I picked up the phone. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, casting a soft glow across the small apartment. The holiday season had arrived, but it felt like a world away from the chaos I'd just left behind. It was early January now, and things had settled into a new, quieter routine. I looked over at Narina, asleep on the couch, her peaceful expression a reminder of everything I was fighting for. She was my reason for everything. As I moved around the apartment, tidying up, I couldn't help but think about how far we'd come in just a few months. There were days when I wondered if I had done the right thing, if I had made the right choice by cutting ties with my family. But the weight I carried had lessened with every passing day. The pressure I had lived under for years, the expectations placed on me, had been lifted. I was working multiple jobs now, but it didn't feel as suffocating. I wasn't under the constant shadow of my family's needs. I wasn't worried about how to pay the bills for them, how to make them proud. My mind was clear, and for the first time in a long time, I was beginning to feel peace. I watched as Narina woke up, rubbing her eyes sleepily. She was doing well in school, thriving in an environment where she felt supported, not just by me, but by the new friends she'd made in our new life. I could see the spark in her eyes, the joy of being free from the expectations that had once held both of us captive. It wasn't easy, of course. There were still days when the weight of everything felt like too much, when the loneliness crept in. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to my parents, trying to show them that I was worth their love, that I forgot what it felt like to be my own person, to be free. But now, there were moments of calm, moments when I could simply breathe and not have to worry about anyone else's approval. It was the middle of the afternoon when the call came. My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me from my thoughts. It was from Narina's school. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was about some assignment or school event I had forgotten. I picked up the phone, my heart thudding in my chest. "Hello?" I answered, my voice steady. "Hi, is this Sabrina?" the voice on the other end asked. "This is Mrs. Green from Narina's school. I have some wonderful news for you." My breath caught. "What is it?" I asked, my hands suddenly trembling. "We are pleased to inform you that Narina has been awarded a scholarship for next year," Mrs. Green continued. "She's shown exceptional progress and has been selected to receive financial aid for her next steps." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I sank onto the chair beside me. I pressed the phone to my ear, hearing nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "This means everything to me." "It's well-deserved," Mrs. Green said warmly. "Narina is a bright student, and we're so happy to be able to support her in her academic journey." I hung up the phone, staring at it in disbelief. I hadn't expected this. It was more than just a scholarship. It was proof that all the sacrifices I'd made had been worth it. Narina would have opportunities that I had never been given. She would have a future that was hers to shape, not one defined by the control of others. Narina walked over to me, sensing my emotion. I pulled her into my arms, hugging her tight. "Mom?" she asked softly. "What's wrong?" I pulled back, smiling through the tears. "You did it, baby," I whispered. "You earned a scholarship. You're going to go far." She blinked in surprise, then grinned, her face lighting up with joy. "Really?" "Really," I said, my voice filled with pride. "You've worked so hard, and now it's paying off." She hugged me again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything was going to be okay. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, I received another call. This time, it was from Corbin. My stomach tightened at the sound of his name on the screen. It had been weeks since I had heard from him, and I wasn't sure I was ready for this. But I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" "Sabrina," his voice came through, strained. We've made mistakes. I've made mistakes. You were always the one who held everything together, and now I see that I should have seen it before. His apology wasn't a surprise, but the way he said it felt empty, like he was trying to justify his actions, to shift the blame. You were always the one who could handle everything, Sabrina, he continued. I didn't want to admit I needed you, but now, it's too late. I stayed quiet for a moment, processing his words. It was the same thing he always said. He needed me, he depended on me. But it was never about love. It was always about control. I've already moved on, Corbin, I said, my voice firm. I've built a new life for myself and Narina. I can't keep trying to fix what's broken when you're not willing to do the same. His response was defensive, like always. You don't get it, do you? This whole thing, the family falling apart, it's all on you now. You're the one who made this decision. You're the one who destroyed us. The anger bubbled up inside me, but I didn't give in. No, Corbin, you've been tearing this family apart for years. I'm done playing your game. I hung up before he could say anything else. I felt a strange sense of finality wash over me. It wasn't bitterness, just peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding everything together. I wasn't the one keeping the family intact. I had no more ties to the chaos they had created. I sat down on the couch, Narina beside me, and felt the weight of the past year lifting. The decisions I had made weren't easy, but they had brought me here, free from the control, free from the expectations. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew that this chapter of my life had come to a close. And for the first time, I was ready to write the next one. As we reach the end of Sabrina's journey, we're reminded that true strength comes from within. No matter how deep the betrayal, how heavy the weight of the past, we all have the power to break free and reclaim our lives. It's not about revenge, but about finding the courage to stand up for ourselves even when everyone else has turned away. What do you think? Can we truly heal after being hurt by those we love most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more powerful stories like Sabrina's, and join us for the next chapter of resilience and growth.